A 17-year-old girl decides to accept a proposal from a mysterious millionaire. But his offer isn't about love. It's about control, desire, and secrets no one dares to speak of. If this story got you hooked, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. The sun died slowly over the rooftops of Rose Valley, a small town in the countryside where even the wind seemed to whisper secrets. The cobblestone streets kept stories between their cracks, and on that particular September afternoon, another was about to begin. Cecilia watched the movement of the central square through the window of Mrs. Zelda's bakery, her fingers still covered with sugar from the last batch of chocolate truffles she had prepared for the church bazaar. The 17-year-old girl had eyes that carried ancient wisdom, the kind that seems to have crossed generations. Her chestnut hair, tied in a messy bun, let escape some strands that danced with the breeze coming through the half-open window. The white apron, stained with chocolate, contrasted with the simple blue cotton dress, a gift from her grandmother, Martha, on her last birthday. Since childhood, Cecilia had learned to live with silence. In the house with faded tiles where she lived with her widowed grandmother, words were measured like precious ingredients in a secret recipe. Martha, a woman in her 70s, carried on her shoulders the weight of secrets that Cecilia only intuited, like fleeting shadows in the corners of the rooms. "Girl, have you already stored the sweets for the bazaar?" Mrs. Zelda's voice pulled Cecilia from her reveries. The baker, a robust woman with rosy cheeks, was one of the few people who could draw more than monosyllables from the young woman. "Yes, ma'am. I've already separated everything in boxes, as you requested," Cecilia replied, her eyes still lost in the movement of the square, where men in dark suits were beginning to gather near the gazebo. It was an unusual group for that small town, where everyone knew each other by first and last name. Rose Valley's rural festival always attracted visitors, but that year seemed different. Rumors ran about investors interested in the land surrounding the city, about changes that would make the place progress, as the most enthusiastic said. For Cecilia, however, there was something unsettling in the air, like the foreboding of a still distant storm. That's when she saw him for the first time. Vincent Calderon stepped out of a gleaming black Mercedes, his impeccable suit defying the suffocating heat of that afternoon. At 47 years old, he emanated a presence that made time stop for an instant in the bakery. His well-trimmed beard framed a face marked by experiences that Cecilia could only imagine, and his eyes were like deep wells where secrets swam like fish in dark waters. The businessman crossed the square with the confidence of someone accustomed to bending the world to his will. Cecilia felt a shiver run down her spine when, for a brief moment, their gazes crossed through the bakery window glass. It was a fleeting instant, but enough to plant a seed of uneasiness in her chest. "That man there is the one who bought the old Mendez mansion," commented Mrs. Zelda, approaching the window. "They say he has so much money he could buy the entire town if he wanted, but they also say other things." The baker lowered her voice, as if the very walls could hear. Cecilia knew that mansion well. It stood on top of the hill that dominated the city, an imposing early 20th century construction that had remained closed for years after the tragic death of its last residents. The stories about that place fed the whispered conversations on porches on Sunday afternoons. "What kind of things?" Cecilia asked, her curiosity momentarily overcoming her habitual reserve. "Oh, child, they say that wherever he goes, he leaves a trail of broken hearts and destroyed fortunes. But you shouldn't worry about that. Men like him live in a different world from ours." But there was something in that first exchange of glances that suggested that Cecilia and Vincent's worlds were about to collide in ways that no one could predict. That night, while helping her grandmother prepare the chamomile tea they always drank before sleeping, Cecilia couldn't get the image of that man out of her mind. Martha, always attentive to changes in her granddaughter's behavior, watched in silence while the girl moved through the small kitchen with unusual restlessness. "You seem distant today," commented the grandmother, her wrinkled hands holding the cup delicately. "Did something happen at the bakery?" Cecilia hesitated, her fingers playing with the hem of her dress. "Not exactly, Grandma. It's just that..." Today I saw the man who bought the Mendez mansion." The sound of the cup being placed abruptly on the saucer echoed through the kitchen. Martha straightened in her chair, her eyes suddenly alert. "Vincent Calderon." The name came out as a tense whisper from her lips. "You know him?" Cecilia asked, surprised by her grandmother's reaction. "Knowing isn't quite the word," Martha replied after a moment of heavy silence. "But I know enough to tell you that you should stay away from him, my child. There are things in this life that are better not understood." That night, Cecilia had one of her intense dreams. She was in the abandoned garden of the mansion, where black roses sprouted under a starless sky. Man was crying in the dark, his tears falling like rain on the flowers. When she tried to approach, doors began to close one after another, the sound echoing like a warning. She woke up startled, her heart beating irregularly, with the certainty that that dream was more than a simple product of her imagination. The days that followed brought unusual agitation to Rose Valley. The approach of the church bazaar mixed with preparations for the rural festival, and Vincent Calderon's name was in all conversations. Some said he planned to transform the land around the city into a luxury complex. Others whispered about his obscure past in New York, stories of forbidden loves and fortunes built on unspeakable secrets. Cecilia continued her work at the bakery, but now every bell that announced a customer's entry made her heart jump. Part of her hoped and feared that Vincent would appear, although she couldn't explain why. Her nights were populated by increasingly vivid dreams, where closed doors kept secrets that seemed to call for her. It was on one of those afternoons, when the heat made the air seem dense like honey, that the bakery bell rang and Cecilia's world truly began to change. Vincent Calderon entered the establishment like an elegant shadow, his discreet but striking perfume filling the environment. This time there was no glass between them, only the bakery counter and the weight of destinies that were beginning to intertwine. "You must be Cecilia." His voice was deep with a tone that suggested natural authority. "I heard about your sweets. They say they're the best in the region." She felt her face burn, but maintained the composure that her grandmother had always taught her. "They're family recipes, Mr. Calderon." "Vincent," he corrected, an almost imperceptible smile on his lips. "I need someone to organize an event. At the mansion next weekend. Mrs. Zelda recommended you." Cecilia cast a quick glance at the baker, who was busy in the back of the store. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. "It's an opportunity that could change your life," Vincent continued, his eyes fixed on her with disturbing intensity. "Of course, if you're interested." In that moment, Cecilia felt as if she were on the edge of a precipice. Part of her wanted to retreat, remember her grandmother's warnings, the whispered stories about that man. But there was something stronger, pushing her forward, a curiosity that went beyond reason, a call that seemed to come from the depths of her own soul. She began, her voice firmer than expected. "I would need to talk to my grandmother first." Vincent nodded, as if he already expected that answer. He took a card from his jacket pocket and slid it across the counter. "Think carefully, Cecilia. Sometimes destiny offers us only one chance to change our story." When he left the bakery, Cecilia realized that her hands were trembling. The card in her hands seemed to weigh a ton, as if it carried not just a phone number, but the weight of a decision that could change everything. That night, while storing the card under her pillow, Cecilia didn't know she was taking the first step in a dangerous dance with destiny. A dance that would lead her to discover that some loves are born from shadows, that some secrets have the power to break and rebuild lives, and that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are those we carry within ourselves. The Mendez Mansion rose against the sky like a somber sentinel, its ancient windows reflecting the last remnant of daylight. Cecilia climbed the marble steps of the main entrance, her heart beating in an irregular rhythm that echoed through the empty corridors. A week had passed since the encounter at the bakery, and after nights of insomnia and silent arguments with her conscience, she was there. The decision hadn't been easy. Martha, upon learning of the proposal, had paled as if she had seen a ghost. "Don't go, my child," the grandmother had pleaded, her trembling hands holding Cecilia's. "That house, that man, there are things that are better left buried." But when Cecilia mentioned the amount Vincent had offered for the service, a sum that could pay for the treatment her grandmother so desperately needed, Martha fell silent, defeated by the weight of necessity. The butler who received her, an elderly man named Augustus, had eyes that seemed to have witnessed decades of secrets. "Mr. Calderon awaits you in the study," he informed, his voice a whisper that mixed with the sound of their own footsteps on the old wooden floor. The mansion's corridors were a labyrinth of luxury and mystery. Old paintings watched her passage with gazes immortalized in oil paint, and the air carried a peculiar perfume, a mixture of withered roses and guarded secrets. Cecilia noticed that some doors were locked, their golden locks shining like silent warnings. Vincent waited for her standing, near a window that overlooked the abandoned gardens. The twilight light painted shadows on his face, making him even more enigmatic. "You came," he said without turning around. It wasn't a question, but a statement that carried a tone of inevitability. "You made a work proposal," Cecilia replied, keeping her voice firm despite the tremor that threatened to betray her. "I'm here to discuss the details." Vincent turned then, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made the air seem denser. "Work?" A subtle smile, almost cruel, played on his lips. "No, Cecilia, what I have for you is much more than simple work." He walked to his desk, a majestic piece of dark mahogany, and picked up an envelope. "This is a contract, different from any other you've seen or will see." He extended the document toward her. "Read carefully. Each word was chosen with a purpose." With slightly trembling fingers, Cecilia opened the envelope. The paper was heavy, elegant, and the words printed on it made her stomach turn. It was an exclusivity contract, a year of her life in exchange for a sum that could not only save her grandmother, but completely transform her reality. "You want me to—" She hesitated, the words stuck in her throat. "I want your presence, Cecilia, physical and emotional, exclusive." Vincent approached, his perfume enveloping her like an invisible prison. "In exchange, I offer more than money. I offer an education you never dreamed of, security you never knew, and a type of freedom that only comfort can provide." "And what else?" Cecilia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Vincent observed her for a long moment, as if measuring each word before pronouncing it. "You know what everyone wants from you, don't you? I won't lie, but I can be gentle, or not. The choice, surprisingly, will be yours." The silence that followed was heavy as lead. Cecilia felt the weight of each beat of her heart, of each breath caught between decision and hesitation. Her mind returned to the dreams she had, the closed doors, the black roses, the crying in the dark. It was all there, materialized in that moment, in that choice. Why me? The question escaped before she could contain it. Vincent moved away, returning to the window. The garden outside was plunged in shadows, but something in it seemed to call to Cecilia. "Because you have something I lost long ago, something I need to recover." And what would that be? Innocence. The word came, out like a painful confession. Not the foolish innocence that everyone presumes in you, but something deeper, a purity of soul that survives even in the shadows. Cecilia looked again at the contract in her hands. Each line seemed to pulse with promises and veiled threats. "And if I refuse? Then you'll walk out that door and continue your life." Simple as that. Vincent turned to face her. "But we both know you won't. There's something in you, Cecilia, something that recognizes the darkness, that desires it even without knowing why." He was right, and that certainty frightened her more than anything. Since that first glance through the bakery window, something inside her had awakened, an ancestral call, as if her soul recognized a path that her body had not yet traveled. With hands that no longer trembled, Cecilia took the pen he offered. The cold metal against her fingers seemed to seal more than an agreement. It sealed a destiny. Her signature flowed over the paper like black ink on white marble, definitive and irreversible. "Welcome to your new life, Cecilia," Vincent spoke, his voice carrying a note of triumph and something more, something that sounded dangerously close to regret. That same night, while her few possessions were transferred to one of the mansion's rooms, Cecilia wandered through the silent corridors. Each step echoed like a decision already made. Each shadow seemed to guard secrets that would gradually be revealed. The room designated for her was a luxurious suite overlooking the abandoned garden. Among the antique and elegant furniture, she found a new dress on the bed, black, silk, with a simple note. For dinner, 8 p.m. While preparing, Cecilia observed her reflection in the ornate mirror. The dress transformed her, as if each fold of the fabric revealed a different version of herself. Her eyes, normally clear as a winter morning, seemed deeper, keeping secrets she didn't yet know. Dinner was served in the main dining room, an impressive piece with a crystal chandelier that poured golden light over the antique table. Vincent waited for her, impeccable in his dark suit like an elegant shadow against the dark red wallpaper. "The first rule," he said as soon as she sat down, "is that there are no rules beyond those I establish, and they can change at any moment." Cecilia nodded, feeling the weight of each word. The wine in her glass shone like blood under the chandelier's light. "The second rule is that you must not ask questions about the past. What happened in this house? What happened to me? All of that is off limits to our agreement." "And if I discover something by accident?" Cecilia dared to ask. A cold smile curved Vincent's lips. "Accidents happen, dear, but not everyone survives them." The rest of the dinner passed in silence, punctuated only by the clinking of silverware and the distant sound of wind in the gardens. Cecilia felt Vincent's gaze on her, not with desire but with a kind of clinical fascination, as if she were a rare specimen he hadn't yet decided how to classify. Later, alone in her room, Cecilia opened the balcony doors and let the night air envelop her body still dressed in black silk. The garden below was a labyrinth of shadows and unspoken promises. Somewhere a rose tried to bloom between weeds and abandoned memories. On that first night, her dreams were different. There were no more closed doors. Now there were endless corridors, each leading to a different version of herself. And in each version, Vincent was there watching, waiting, as if he knew that all paths would eventually lead to the same dark destiny. The days at the mansion followed their own rhythm, as if time obeyed different rules within those ancient walls. Cecilia quickly learned that each room had its own personality, its own secrets whispered in the shadows of corners. Mornings began early, with Augustus bringing an elaborate breakfast tray and a schedule meticulously planned by Vincent. Etiquette. Lessons, French piano. The transformation Vincent had promised began to take shape. Her teachers, all middle-aged women with gazes too compassionate to be natural, treated her with a mixture of respect and poorly disguised pity. Madame Dupont, her French instructor, once let slip, "You are different from the others, ma chérie. Perhaps that's why he's being more patient." Those words haunted Cecilia for days. Others? How many had passed through those same corridors, learned the same lessons, slept in the same room that was now hers? The mystery grew like the vines she began to notice in the abandoned garden, wild, insistent, hiding and revealing secrets, in equal measure. Vincent maintained his own routine, frequently absent during the day in business meetings in town or trips to New York. But the nights belonged to a particular ritual he had established since the first day. Formal dinners where each bite was a lesson in power and submission, each sip of wine a dance between desire and fear. It was during one of those dinners, when October was already painting afternoons with more golden tones, that something changed. Vincent seemed different. His eyes carried an uneasiness that Cecilia had never seen before. "The garden," he said abruptly, placing his wineglass on the table with too much force. "You've been spending too much time there." Cecilia felt her heart accelerate. The garden had become her refuge, the only place in the mansion where she felt truly free. In recent weeks, she had dedicated her free hours to cleaning flower beds, pruning dead plants, trying to bring life back to that abandoned space. "I'm sorry. I didn't know I shouldn't." "It's not a matter of should or shouldn't," Vincent interrupted, his voice cutting like ice. It's a matter of understanding that some things must remain as they are, dead, buried. Like your wife? The words escaped before she could contain them, and the silence that followed was deafening. Vincent rose slowly, his movements too controlled not to be threatening. Where did you hear about her? People in town, they comment, about how she cared for the garden, about how she... Cecilia hesitated, her voice failing. About how she threw herself from the balcony, Vincent completed, a humorless smile distorting his lips. About the note she left? He will never love as he thinks. Is that what you want to know, Cecilia? He approached her, each step echoing in the dining room like a storm's foreboding. Want to know if I'm capable of love? If I'm a monster who collects young women like you? If I destroy them one by one? Cecilia remained motionless in her chair, her heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear it. I want to know who I am in this story. The answer seemed to catch him by surprise. For a moment, too brief to be certain, something resembling vulnerability passed through his eyes. You are a possibility, nothing more, nothing less. That night, while the mansion slept its restless sleep, Cecilia couldn't rest. Vincent's words echoed in her mind, mixing with the whispers she had begun to hear in the corridors, with the shadows that seemed to move when no one was looking. She got up from her bed and walked to the balcony. The garden below was a labyrinth of shadows under the moonlight, but something caught her attention. A light, weak and flickering, moved among the trees. Without thinking twice, she put on her robe and went down the stairs silently. The night air was charged with the perfume of roses that were beginning to bloom, flowers she hadn't planted, that seemed to have appeared from nowhere in recent weeks. She followed the mysterious light, her bare feet feeling the damp grass beneath them. That's when she saw him. Vincent, in his dress pants and white shirt partially unbuttoned, wandered through the garden with an old razor in his hand. His lips moved in a constant murmur, names that Cecilia couldn't distinguish mixed with promises and laments. Helen, Marina, Beatrice. The names escaped from his lips like distorted prayers. Why didn't you understand? Why didn't any of you understand? Cecilia remained motionless in the shadows, her heart torn between fear and a strange form of compassion. Vincent seemed smaller there, vulnerable in a way she had never imagined possible. The razor in his hand gleamed under the moonlight, but he didn't use it to threaten. Instead, he cut roses one by one, letting them fall to the ground like black tears. A broken branch under her feet betrayed her presence. Vincent turned abruptly, his wild eyes taking a few seconds to focus on her. Cecilia. His voice was different, almost childlike in its confusion. Yes, she replied softly, taking a step toward him. It's me. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't see me like this. But there was no threat in his voice, only deep exhaustion. Maybe I should, Cecilia replied, her own courage surprising her. Maybe it's time for someone to see you as you really are. Vincent let the razor fall into the grass, the metal reflecting one last gleam before disappearing among the flowers. You don't know who I really am. Then show me. Cecilia took another step toward him, not through contracts or rules or etiquette lessons. Show me who you are when all the masks fall. The silence that followed was filled only by the sound of wind in the trees and the increasingly strong perfume of roses. Vincent watched her as if seeing her for the first time, as if something fundamental had changed in the universe at that exact moment. There are things in me, he began, his voice hoarse, that would destroy your innocence forever. My innocence isn't as fragile as you think, Cecilia replied, now close enough to see the unshed tears in his eyes. And maybe I'm not as innocent as you imagine. In that moment, under the silvery moonlight and surrounded by roses that seemed to sprout from the very shadows, something changed between them. It wasn't a kiss, not even a touch. It was a silent understanding that they both carried darkness within them, and that perhaps, just perhaps, their shadows could dance together without completely destroying each other. Vincent raised his hand, his fingers trembling slightly before touching Cecilia's face. You should run, he whispered. Run far from here while you still can. Maybe, she replied, leaning her face against his touch. But I won't. The garden around them seemed to breathe, the roses opening their petals like silent witnesses to a pact being sealed. The mansion above cast its shadow over them, guardian of secrets yet to come, of truths that would need to be unearthed, along with the deepest roots of that mysterious garden. And there, on that October night, among flowers that were born from shadows and secrets that were beginning to reveal themselves, Cecilia understood that she was just at the beginning of her true transformation. Not the one Vincent had planned with his lessons and rules, but a deeper, more dangerous metamorphosis, one that would require her to face not only his demons, but also her own. The mansion's library was a sanctuary of secrets bound in leather and gold. Cecilia discovered this space by chance on a rainy afternoon when Vincent was in New York. The key appeared mysteriously on her dressing table. Later she would suspect it was Augustus, the sad-eyed butler, who had left it there, like someone offering a clue in a macabre game. The shelves extended from floor to ceiling, holding not only books but also folders, documents, and, she would discover soon, memories that should remain buried. The smell of old paper and guarded secrets filled the air, while rain battered the tall windows like a distant warning. It was between two shelves in the back, hidden behind a false wall of books, that Cecilia found the first box. A simple box, without ornaments, but closed with a padlock that easily yielded to the set of keys she had found, along with the library key. Inside there were letters, photographs, and diaries, all belonging to women who had passed through the mansion before. Hers to her, "Dear Diary," began one of the notebooks dated 3 years ago. "Today marks 1 month since I signed the contract. Vincent is different from what I imagined. There are moments when his eyes seem to contain all the weight of the world, and others when they shine with a cruelty that makes me tremble, but not from fear, from anticipation." Cecilia felt a shiver run down her spine as she turned the pages. The handwriting, initially firm and elegant, became increasingly erratic as the weeks passed. The last entries were almost illegible, stained by something that seemed to be tears or blood. "He doesn't sleep. He wanders the corridors at night, calling for her, for all of them. Sometimes, when he thinks I'm sleeping, he sits at the foot of my bed and cries. Other times he laughs, and I don't know which of the two situations scares me more." The diary's author, Helen Santos, had mysteriously disappeared 6 months after her arrival at the mansion. The newspapers of the time, also kept in the box, speculated about escape or suicide, but there was no body. There were no answers. Another folder contained documents about Marina Alves, interned in a psychiatric clinic by court order, with documents signed by Vincent himself. The medical report spoke of persecutory delusions and self-destructive tendencies, but among the official pages, Cecilia found hastily written notes. "He's not human. He can't be. I saw what he does in the basement on full moon nights. I saw the symbols, heard the chants. Someone needs to know the truth before—" The note ended abruptly, as if the author had been interrupted in the middle of thought. Marina was still alive, theoretically, locked in an institution where no one would believe her words. But it was the third folder that made Cecilia's blood freeze. Inside it, an old photograph, dated 1984. The woman in the image could be her twin sister, the same eyes, the same hesitant smile, even the small birthmark near the chin. The name on the back, Beatrice Mendez. Impossible, Cecilia murmured to herself, her hands trembling while holding the photograph. Had Beatrice been Vincent's wife, the woman who had thrown herself from the balcony? But how could she be so similar to her? A noise at the library door made her jump. Quickly she put everything back in the box except for Beatrice's photograph, which she slipped into her dress pocket like a stolen confession. "Miss Cecilia," Augustus's voice sounded from the other side of the door. "Mr. Calderon has just arrived. He requests your presence at dinner." "I'm coming," she replied, trying to control the tremor in her voice. During dinner, Cecilia could barely concentrate on the silverware or the etiquette rules she had learned so meticulously. Every time she looked at Vincent, She saw shadows of unanswered questions dancing in his eyes. "You seem distant tonight," he commented, his casual tone carrying a note of warning. "Just tired from lessons," she lied, hating how falsehood now slipped easily from her lips. "Madame Dupont is demanding." Vincent studied her for a long moment, as if he could read every hidden thought behind her eyes. "You've been adapting well to life here, better than others." "Others?" Cecilia dared to ask, her heart beating violently against her ribs. "Don't be naive, dear. You must have already heard the stories, the rumors." He took a sip of wine, his eyes never leaving hers. "But you're different, special." "Why?" The word came out as a whisper. "Because you carry something of them. Something I thought I had lost forever." Vincent leaned forward, his fingers lightly brushing her hand on the table. "Something I need to recover." That night, alone in her room, Cecilia faced her reflection in the mirror for hours. Beatrice's photograph beside her seemed to mock her with its impossible resemblance. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "There are things that are better left buried," but it was already too late. The mansion's secrets had begun to reveal themselves, like poisonous flowers blooming in darkness. And Cecilia knew with a certainty that frightened her that she was irremediably intertwined in this web of mysteries. A distant thunder shook the windows, and for a moment she thought she saw a female figure reflected in the mirror behind her, a woman in a white dress with her own face smiling a smile that wasn't hers. The next morning, when going down for coffee, she found a gift on the dining room table. A black velvet box containing a diamond choker, the same one Beatrice wore in the photograph. "For tonight," said Vincent's note, "we have an important event, and you need to be perfect." The choker weighed in her hands like a sentence. Each diamond seemed to contain a fragment of the stories she had discovered. Helen, Marina, Beatrice. How many others were there? And what would be her role in this dark story that seemed to repeat like an elaborate nightmare? But there was something more now, a determination growing within her. If Vincent sought something in the women he brought to the mansion, something he had lost or never really possessed, perhaps she would be the only one who could finally confront him with his own demons. She put the choker around her neck, the cold, diamonds against her skin like frozen tears. In the mirror, her reflection smiled, and this time she wasn't sure if the smile was really hers. The event Vincent was preparing for was more than a simple business dinner. It was a presentation. Cecilia understood this the moment she descended the mansion stairs, wearing a blood-red dress that seemed to have been made especially for her. The main hall was full of high society people, all dressed in dark tones like crows gathered for a feast. Vincent waited for her at the foot of the stairs, his eyes shining with something close to triumph when he saw her wearing the diamond choker. "Perfect," he murmured, offering his arm. "Exactly as I imagined." Among the guests, Cecilia noticed glances that varied between curiosity and poorly disguised pity. An older lady with a pearl necklace that seemed to weigh a ton approached them. "So this is your new protégé?" the woman asked, studying Cecilia like someone evaluating a piece on display. "Impressive resemblance. You always had a specific type, didn't you, Vincent?" "Mrs. Montero," Vincent replied, his voice carrying a veiled warning. "Always a pleasure, but I believe there are other guests requiring my attention." As they circulated through the hall, more fragments of conversations reached Cecilia's ears. Whispers about the other girls, about convenient accidents, and that poor Beatrice. Each word was like a piece of a macabre puzzle that was beginning to take shape. That's when she saw him, a young man close to 30, watching her intently from across the hall. Unlike the other guests, he didn't look away when their eyes met. Instead, he made a discreet gesture toward the garden. "I need fresh air," Cecilia murmured to Vincent, who was occupied in a discussion about investments. "Don't be long," he replied, his fingers lightly squeezing her arm before releasing her. "And don't go too far." The night air was heavy with the perfume of garden roses. The man was already waiting for her among the shadows of the trees, his dark suit making him almost invisible in the penumbra. "My name is Michael Santos," he said without preamble. "Helen was my sister." Cecilia felt her heart skip a beat. Helen, the owner of the diary she had found in the library. "I read about her." "No, you read what Vincent allowed to be preserved," Michael corrected, his voice loaded with bitterness. "The truth is much darker, and you need to know before it's too late." He took an envelope from his jacket's inner pocket. "I'm an investigative journalist. I've spent the last 3 years gathering information about Vincent Calderon, about his father, Dr. Richard Calderon, and about the psychiatric clinic he administered in the 70s. The clinic," Cecilia took the envelope with trembling hands. "A place of horrors disguised as a treatment institute. Dr. Calderon conducted experiments with his patients. Young, vulnerable women, all with a specific profile, all similar to—" "Beatrice," Cecilia completed, her voice barely a whisper. "No," Michael shook his head. "To Vincent's mother, the first Beatrice, the woman who abandoned him when he was only 5 years old, leaving him in his father's care." The pieces were beginning to fit together, a sick pattern of obsession and revenge transmitted from father to son. And Vincent followed his father's footsteps, but in a more sophisticated way. He doesn't need a clinic. He has this mansion. He has his money and influence. And he has a compulsive need to recreate a moment, a person, a redemption he will never achieve. A noise among the bushes made them both jump. Michael quickly moved away, whispering, "There's more in the documents. And there's something about your grandmother you need to know. Look in the clinic records for a patient named Claire Mendez. She—" "Cecilia." Vincent's voice cut through the night like a razor. "Where are you, dear?" "Go," Michael murmured, disappearing among the garden shadows. Cecilia barely had time to hide the envelope in her dress bodice before Vincent appeared. His face was serene, but his eyes burned with contained fury that she had never seen before. "I thought I told you not to go far," he said, approaching like a predator. "The garden can be dangerous at night." "I just needed air," she replied, keeping her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "The conversations in there are just that, conversations." Vincent touched the choker on her neck, his cold fingers against her skin. "You're trembling, my dear. Are you afraid of me?" "No," she replied, and was surprised to realize it was true. It wasn't fear she felt. It was something more complex, a mixture of fascination and horror, of compassion and revulsion. "I'm afraid of what we're capable of doing to each other." Vincent laughed, a low sound without humor. "You have no idea what I'm capable of, Cecilia, but you'll find out. Everyone finds out eventually." Back in the hall, the party continued as if nothing had happened, but something had changed. Every glance, every gesture, every word seemed loaded with new meanings. Cecilia danced with Vincent, their bodies moving in perfect synchrony, while her mind boiled with Michael's revelations. Claire Mendez. Did her grandmother have something to do with this whole story? Was that why Martha had been so disturbed when she learned she was going to work for Vincent? Later, when the last guest left, and the mansion plunged again into its habitual silence, Vincent held her longer than necessary as they said goodbye in the corridor. "You are special, Cecilia," he murmured, his lips close to her ear. "More special than you imagine, and tomorrow we'll begin to unravel exactly how much." In her room, with hands still trembling, Cecilia opened Michael's envelope. The first pages were records from the old clinic, black and white photographs of sterile corridors, medical notes in angular handwriting, and then her grandmother's face, 30 years younger, on an admission file. On the last page, a recent note from Michael. Claire Mendez wasn't just another patient. She was the last person to see the first Beatrice alive, and Vincent is her son. Dawn found Cecilia still awake, her red eyes fixed on the documents scattered over her bed. The words danced before her like accusations, medical reports, birth certificates, newspaper clippings yellowed by time. The story that emerged from those pages was darker than any nightmare she had ever had. Claire Mendez, her grandmother, had been interned at Dr. Richard Calderon's clinic, in 1975, diagnosed with persecutory delusions and violent tendencies. The medical records, however, told a different story. Claire was pregnant when she was interned, and Dr. Calderon's notes revealed a peculiar interest in her case. "Patient demonstrates exceptional resistance to treatment," said one of the notes. "Continues insisting that the child is the result of a consensual relationship with Beatrice Calderon. Clearly delusional. Increased dosage." Cecilia's hands trembled as she read the following pages. Her grandmother had given birth at the clinic, a girl who was immediately taken for adoption. This girl grew up to become Cecilia's mother, deceased, in childbirth, without ever knowing the truth about her origins. A noise in the corridor made her hastily store the documents under the mattress. Seconds later, a gentle knock on the door. "Miss Cecilia," Augustus's voice sounded hesitant. "Mr. Calderon requests your presence in the study, immediately." Vincent's study was plunged in penumbra when she entered, the heavy velvet curtains filtering the morning light. He stood by the window, his silhouette outlined against the dark fabric like a living shadow. "You know, Cecilia," he began without turning around, "there are people who think they can interfere in matters that don't concern them. People who dig up the past like dogs sniffing old bones." Her heart accelerated, but she kept her voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about." Vincent turned slowly, a cold smile playing on his lips. In his hands, a newspaper from that day. The headline made Cecilia's blood freeze. "Investigative journalist found dead in hotel." "Michael Santos," Vincent continued, throwing the newspaper on the table, "apparently committed suicide last night. Drug overdose. Tragic, isn't it?" Cecilia felt her legs weaken, but forced herself to remain standing. "Why?" "Why?" Vincent repeated, approaching her with measured steps. "Because some truths are like poison, my dear. They slowly kill those who dare to taste them." He stopped inches from her, his familiar perfume now seeming suffocating. "But you've already tasted that poison, haven't you? You've already discovered the secrets he tried to reveal." "You're my uncle," Cecilia whispered, the words coming out like a painful confession. "The son that Beatrice had with your grandfather," Vincent completed, his hand rising to touch her face with disturbing delicacy. "A story of forbidden love that ended in tragedy, or began with one. It depends on who tells the story." "And all the other women? Helen, Marina, were they experiments, attempts to recreate your mother?" Vincent laughed, a low and bitter sound. "No, dear. They were rehearsals, preparation for the grand finale, for you." His fingers slid to her neck, finding the diamond choker. "You are the culmination of decades of planning, the perfect union of Calderon and Mendez blood, the chance to correct the errors of the past." "You're insane," Cecilia murmured, but didn't pull away. There was something hypnotic about his proximity, a sick attraction that made her want to understand more, dive deeper into that darkness. "Madness is relative, my dear. My father thought he was doing science. My mother thought she was liberating herself. Your grandmother thought she was protecting a forbidden love. And me?" He smiled, his eyes shining with feverish intensity. "I'm just completing a cycle." "And what happens now?" Cecilia asked, her voice firmer than expected. Vincent moved away, returning to the window. "Now you have a choice. You can run like all the others tried. You can fight like some dared. Or you can accept your role in this story and discover that some destinies, however dark they may seem, are inevitable. And if I choose to stay." The words came out before she could contain them. Not out of acceptance, but to understand, to discover the complete truth. He turned, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her shudder. "Then you would be the first to choose darkness by your own will, not by manipulation or fear." In that moment, something changed in the air between them. The power Vincent had always exercised over her began to transform into something different, something more complex. It was no longer just the controller and the controlled, the hunter and the prey. It was a mutual recognition of shared shadows, of secrets that ran in the same blood. "There's a ball next week," Vincent said after a long silence. "A special event. The same ball where my mother met your grandfather 40 years ago. The same ball where the last Beatrice danced before throwing herself from the balcony. Be ready." When Cecilia left the study, her legs were trembling, but her mind was clear. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fit together, forming an image that was both terrible and fascinating. She wasn't just another piece in Vincent's game. She was the game itself, the conclusion of a story that had begun long before her birth. In her room, she found a new gift on the bed, a black ball gown, identical to the one Beatrice had worn on her last night. Along with it, a note written in Vincent's elegant handwriting. "Some stories need to be rewritten to be understood. Some wounds can only be healed when they bleed again." Cecilia touched the dress fabric, feeling its texture under her fingers, like an omen. She had 1 week to discover the entire truth, to decide if she would be Vincent Calderon's salvation or final destruction. 1 week to understand if the love she was beginning to feel for him was as inevitable as it was sick. The days that preceded the ball passed like a feverish dream in the Calderon mansion. Cecilia observed the preparations with a mixture of fascination and horror. Every detail seemed a meticulous recreation of past events, as if Vincent were directing a macabre play where everyone were unconscious actors of their roles. During this time, she began making secret visits to her grandmother. Martha, now aware that her granddaughter knew the truth, finally began to unearth the memories she had kept buried for decades. Beatrice was light, Martha told on a particularly somber afternoon, her wrinkled hands trembling over the teacup. Not the Beatrice who threw herself from the balcony, the first one, Vincent's mother. She was a nurse at Dr. Calderon's clinic, and she was the only one who saw humanity in us, the patients, the only one who tried to help us. "And my grandfather?" Cecilia asked gently. A sad smile touched Martha's lips. "Richard Calderon was a complex man, brilliant and monstrous in equal measure. He fell in love with Beatrice as soon as she started working at the clinic, but she fell in love with me. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Was that why they interned you?" "That's why he destroyed us," Martha corrected, her eyes lost in painful memories. "When he discovered about us, about the baby I was expecting, the result of an experimental procedure he himself had developed, Richard went insane. Beatrice tried to help us escape, but what happened to her? Officially, a car accident. Actually, no one ever knew. The body was never found. And Richard, he raised Vincent to be his living revenge, his personified obsession. Back at the mansion, every room seemed to whisper new secrets. Cecilia spent hours in the library, now with unrestricted access guaranteed by Vincent, who seemed almost eager for her to discover every layer of truth. It was on one of those research afternoons that she found Dr. Richard Calderon's diary, hidden in a secret compartment behind a bookshelf. The yellowed pages revealed the extent of his obsession. The procedure was a success beyond expectations. "Claire carries not just a child, but the key to my greatest conquest. The perfect combination of DNA, the possibility of recreating not just life, but essence." Beatrice tried to stop it, of course, always the savior, always the martyr. But she doesn't understand. This is bigger than all of us. The notes continued, increasingly disturbing, detailing experiments with other patients, attempts to replicate the success achieved with Claire. All failed, resulting in deaths or children who didn't meet the doctor's expectations. "Vincent understands," said one of the last entries. "Even young, he already shows the signs. The obsession with perfection, the understanding that some ends justify any means. He will be my true legacy." The night before the ball, Vincent found her in the library. She wasn't surprised. Somehow she knew he would come. "Did you find what you were looking for?" he asked, sitting in the leather armchair beside her. "I found more than I expected," Cecilia replied, closing the diary. "Your father, he wasn't just doing experiments, was he?" Vincent smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "He was trying to recreate a miracle, the only thing he ever truly loved and lost. Not very different from me, is it?" "And me? Am I just another attempt to recreate your mother?" "No." Vincent leaned forward, his eyes shining with almost painful intensity. You are the conclusion, the final result of decades of planning, the perfect union of all the elements my father spent his life trying to control. And what does that mean for us? Cecilia asked, her voice barely passing a whisper. It means that tomorrow night during the ball everything will be decided. You'll understand your true purpose, your true nature. He stood up, extending his hand to touch her face. And then, my dear, you'll have to make a choice. What choice? Between accepting who you really are, who we really are, or trying to escape the destiny that was written for us long before your birth. That night, Cecilia dreamed of the ball. But in her dream, it wasn't she who danced with Vincent. It was Beatrice, the first Beatrice, her eyes full of ancient sadness as she spun through the ballroom. Some stories don't need to be rewritten, the woman said in her dream. Some need to be completely destroyed so that something new can be born. When she woke up, she found a black rose on her pillow, a variety that didn't exist in nature, created through decades of experiments in the clinic's secret laboratories. Along with it, a final note from Vincent. Tonight, you'll understand why some roses only bloom in the dark, why some loves only survive in shadows, and why some destinies are written in blood long before we're born to fulfill them. The black dress she would wear hung like a living shadow in her room, and when Cecilia touched it, she felt the fabric was damp, not with water but with something darker, more viscous, as if the dress itself cried tears of blood for the secrets it was about to reveal. The ball began at sunset, when the last lights of day still painted the sky blood red. The Calderon mansion pulsed with ancient energy, as if the very walls recognized the importance of that night. Guests arrived in their luxury cars, women in ball gowns and men in impeccable tuxedos, all unaware that they were mere extras in a much larger drama. Cecilia remained in her room until the last possible moment, watching through the window as night swallowed the day. The black dress embraced her body like a second skin, the silk still damp in some spots, leaving dark stains on her fingers when she touched the fabric. The diamond choker around her neck seemed heavier than ever, each precious stone carrying the weight of an untold story. It was Augustus who came to get her, his sad eyes darker than usual. "It's time, miss," he said softly. "Mr. Calderon awaits you at the top of the main staircase." In the corridor, Cecilia passed by one of the mansion's many antique mirrors and almost didn't recognize her reflection. It wasn't just the resemblance to Beatrice that frightened her now. There was something more, something in the shadows of her eyes, in the curve of her lips, that suggested a deeper transformation. Vincent waited for her exactly where Augustus had said, an imposing figure, in his black tuxedo. When he saw her, something in his eyes changed. It wasn't desire nor obsession, but a type of primitive recognition, as if he finally found something he had been searching for decades. "You are," he began, but the words seemed to fail. "Ready," Cecilia completed, her voice firmer than expected. The music coming from the main hall was the same waltz that had played 40 years ago when the first Beatrice had danced with Richard Calderon. The same music that played when the last Beatrice had her last dance before going up to the balcony. As they descended the stairs together, Cecilia felt all eyes turn to them. The whispers began immediately, some recognizing the music, others noticing the dress, identical to the one Beatrice had worn on her last night. But it was one person's eyes in particular that captured her. Attention. Her grandmother Martha stood near the hall entrance, wearing a simple but elegant dress. She shouldn't be there. She wasn't on the guest list, Cecilia was sure. But something about her presence seemed inevitable, as if the circle couldn't close without her. "Let's dance," Vincent murmured in her ear, leading her to the center of the ballroom. The waltz began, and with it, a series of events that seemed predestined from the beginning. Each step, each turn, each touch of Vincent's hands on her waist seemed to carry the weight of decades of history. "You know what happens now, don't you?" Vincent asked as they danced, his voice barely a whisper. "The ritual," Cecilia replied, the words coming out as if they were ancient memories awakening. "What your father began at the clinic, what you continued with all the others." "Yes," he confirmed, his eyes shining with feverish intensity. "But this time it will be different, because you're not like the others. You are the final result, the culmination of everything." The music continued, hypnotic, while Vincent led her toward the stairs that led to the second floor. The guests watched, some with curiosity, others with veiled horror, as if unconsciously recognizing the pattern that was repeating. It was when they reached the second-floor corridor that Cecilia felt the first change. The air became denser, charged with a sweet and metallic perfume that she recognized from dreams, the perfume of black roses that grew only in the mansion's secret garden. "You can feel it, can't you?" Vincent asked, his voice changing to something older, deeper, the call of blood, the conclusion of the cycle. The corridor doors began to open by themselves as they passed, revealing rooms Cecilia had never seen before, in each of them, black. Candles burned in circles, and in the center of each circle, a black rose floated in a crystal goblet filled with a dark liquid. "Your father wasn't just doing scientific experiments at the clinic," Cecilia said, the words coming from somewhere, deep in her genetic memory. "He was trying to create something more, something that combined science and magic," Vincent completed, "the oldest form of power, the kind of power that allows rewriting destiny itself. And you, my dear, are the key to all of this." They reached the last door, the one that led to the balcony, the same place where two Beatrices had contemplated their destinies, the same place where everything should end, or begin. "But there's something you don't know," Cecilia said, stopping before Vincent could open the door. "Something that not even your father discovered." Vincent looked at her with curiosity. "And what would that be?" "The first Beatrice didn't die in that car accident," she replied, her voice changing, becoming older, wiser. "She completed her own ritual, a protection ritual sealed with the blood of her love for my grandmother. And that ritual—" Cecilia smiled, a smile that wasn't entirely hers, "is about to be completed." In the hall below, the music stopped, abruptly. The lights began to flicker, and the perfume of black roses became almost suffocating. Vincent took a step back, his eyes wide with a mixture of understanding and terror. "You're not just Claire's granddaughter," he whispered. "You are—" "The conclusion of the cycle," Cecilia completed. "But not your cycle, Vincent. Hers." Chaos installed itself in the Calderon mansion like a long-predicted storm. The lights continued flickering, creating a macabre dance of shadows on the walls. In the main hall, guests began to panic, but discovered that the main doors were inexplicably locked. Vincent staggered backward, his mask of control finally shattering. "Impossible," he murmured, his eyes fixed on Cecilia as if seeing her for the first time. "You can't be—" "Your mother," Cecilia completed, her voice now carrying echoes of another era. "No, I'm not. But I carry part of her in me, just as I carry part of all of them. Blood has memory, Vincent, and some memories are too powerful to be erased." The black dress she wore began to change, the silk seeming to liquefy and recompose itself, revealing ancient patterns that glowed with their own light. The diamond choker around her neck pulsed, as if each stone contained a small flame. "The ritual your father tried to perform," Cecilia continued, advancing while Vincent retreated, "wasn't to create life or recreate love. It was to channel power. The kind of power that only exists in the blood of women who loved beyond reason, who suffered beyond limits, who were broken and rebuilt themselves." Downstairs, Martha began to sing, an ancient melody in a language few there would recognize. Other voices joined hers, voices that seemed to come from the mansion's very walls, from the corridor shadows, from the garden where black roses bloomed. "Helen," Vincent whispered, recognizing one of the voices. "Marina. Beatrice." "They're all here," Cecilia confirmed. "All the women you tried to mold in your image of perfect love, all the lives you tried to control. And now," she smiled, a smile that mixed compassion and determination, "now it's time to free them." Vincent tried to reach for something in his pocket, probably the same old razor he used in his nightly walks through the garden. But his body didn't respond. He was paralyzed, trapped by forces his father had tried to control and failed miserably. "I love you, Vincent," Cecilia said softly, approaching him. "Not in the sick way you planned, not as an obsession or a recreation of the past. I love the wounded child you were, the broken man you became, and that's why I need to do this." She raised her hands, and the balcony doors opened violently. The wind that entered carried black rose petals and whispers of past lives. Vincent was forced to retreat to the parapet, the same place where two women before him had found their destinies. "Please," he begged, and for the first time in decades, real tears ran down his face. "Don't leave me like she left." Cecilia approached, touching his face with a tenderness that made him sob. "I won't leave you. I'm going to do something much more difficult. I'm going to save you." In the garden below, the black roses began to change color, becoming white as snow. Under the moonlight, Martha's singing reached its peak, and with it all the mansion's lights went out simultaneously. In the absolute darkness that followed, something ancestral and powerful awakened. The blood of generations of women, loved, betrayed, broken, and reborn, ran through Cecilia's veins like liquid fire. Each beat of her heart was an echo of lost and found loves, of pain transformed into power, of fragilities converted into strength. "You tried to recreate your mother's love," she whispered, against Vincent's lips. "But true love cannot be recreated or controlled. It can only be liberated," he completed, his voice breaking on the last syllable. The kiss that followed wasn't like any other they had ever shared. It was a kiss of transformation, of purification, of rebirth. As their lips touched, the power accumulated. By decades of rituals and experiments was finally released. An intense light exploded from the balcony, bathing the entire mansion in a glare that outshone the night. When the light dimmed, Vincent was different. The weight of decades of obsession had left his shoulders. His father's shadow had disappeared from his eyes. In the main hall, the doors opened, freeing the stunned guests. The garden roses, now completely white, filled the air with a perfume of renewal, and on the mansion walls the old Calderon portraits began to dissolve like ashes in the wind, taking with them the last vestiges of a curse that had lasted generations. Martha climbed the stairs to find them, her eyes shining with tears of relief and understanding. "It's over," she said, embracing Cecilia. "The circle has been broken." Vincent fell to his knees, sobbing like the child he had never been allowed to be. Cecilia knelt beside him, holding him, while years of pain and guilt were finally released. "What happens now?" he asked when he could finally speak, his voice hoarse and vulnerable. Cecilia smiled, a smile that carried the wisdom of all the women who came before her. "Now, my love, we begin again, not as an obsession or a repetition of the past, but as something new, something ours." The Calderon mansion would never be the same after that night. The corridors that once whispered dark secrets now echoed with promises of redemption. The garden, free from black roses, flourished with new and natural life. And on the walls, where portraits of a dynasty built on control and obsession once hung, windows were opened to let in sunlight. A year had passed since the night of the ball, and spring was returning to paint Rose Valley with its soft colors. The Calderon mansion, once a somber fortress of secrets and obsessions, now stood transformed against the blue sky, its windows always open to sunlight. Cecilia was in the garden, supervising the last phase of its restoration. The roses, now, in all possible natural colors, formed a living mosaic that attracted butterflies and birds. There were no more fences or high walls. The garden had become an open space for the community, a symbol of the transformation the entire city had experienced. Vincent approached from behind her, his steps soft on the freshly cut grass. He, too, was different. The weight of obsession had left his shoulders, and his eyes, once so dark, now carried a peace that few would believe possible. "I thought I'd find you here," he said, wrapping her in his arms. Martha just arrived with the Foundation's last documents. The Beatrice Foundation, as it had been named, was born from the ashes of the Calderon Empire. Dedicated to supporting women in vulnerable situations, the organization had transformed the old psychiatric clinic into a recovery and empowerment center. "And the letters?" Cecilia asked, turning to face him. "Did you manage to finish them?" Vincent nodded, a gentle smile on his lips. "One for each of them. Helen, Marina, all of them." Explaining, asking forgiveness, offering what I can in reparation. Some of the letters could never be delivered. Some wounds were too deep to be completely healed. But the act of writing them, of acknowledging each life that had been affected by his obsession, was a fundamental part of Vincent's healing process. "Do you still dream of them?" he asked softly, his fingers intertwined with hers. "Sometimes," Cecilia replied honestly. "But they're no longer nightmares. They're more like memories, echoes of stories that needed to be told and heard." The power that had awakened on that ball night still ran through her veins, but in a different way now. It was no longer a force of destruction or violent transformation, but a gift of healing and understanding. The women who sought help at the foundation frequently commented on the feeling of peace they felt in her presence, as if something in her blood responded to an ancient call of sisterhood and healing. "Your mother would be proud," Martha said, approaching the couple with a folder of documents. The first Beatrice always dreamed of a place like this. Vincent tensed slightly at the mention of his mother, but there was no longer bitterness in his reaction, only a gentle longing for something that was, finally, at peace. "We found some more files from my father," he commented, leafing through the documents Martha had brought. "Apparently he kept records of everything. Each experiment, each attempt." "And what do you intend to do with them?" Cecilia asked, although she already knew the answer. "Transform them into knowledge, into warning, into hope." Vincent smiled, a smile that still carried traces of sadness, but also determination. The foundation shouldn't just be about helping, it should be about learning from the past so as not to repeat it. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. In the center of the garden, a statue had been erected, not a monument to the Calderon dynasty, but a representation of 3 women holding hands, Beatrice, Claire, and Cecilia, 3 generations united by blood, pain, and finally, redemption. "Sometimes, I wonder," Vincent murmured, observing the statue, "if all of this was inevitable, if from the beginning we were destined for this moment." Cecilia considered the question for a moment, feeling the weight of the diamond choker around her neck, the same one she now wore not as a symbol of possession, but as a transformed memory. "I think some loves are like that," she replied finally. "They need to cross through darkness to find light. They need to be broken to be rebuilt. They need to die to be reborn." That night, while the city slept and stars shone over the renewed garden, Vincent and Cecilia danced on the balcony, the same place where so much trauma had occurred. But now the music was different, the love was different, they were different. The roses in the garden swayed gently with the night breeze, their petals reflecting moonlight like fulfilled promises. And in the shadows between the flowers, the spirits of the women who came before, Beatrice, Helen, Marina, and so many others, danced too, finally free, finally at peace. The love between Vincent and Cecilia was no longer an obsession born from trauma and control, but something new and true, built on foundations of understanding, forgiveness, and transformation. They had learned that some stories don't need to be rewritten, they just need to be freed to find their own path to light. And so, in the mansion that once housed so many shadows, love finally found its true form, not in the chains of the past, but on the wings of the future, not in the obsession to recreate what was lost, but in the courage to create something entirely new. In Rose Valley, people still whisper about the Calderon mansion, but now the stories are different. They speak of healing, of transformation, of love that survives the deepest shadows. And on full moon